Chapter 8. The home came into view, and Tara couldn't help but admire it. It was a large cottage, sitting on about a few acres of land, with a thick forest in the distance. Perfectly arranged flowers were in a bed beneath each window. The house was well taken care of, and there was such a tranquility about it that Tara found it oddly ironic. Warren pulled the car into the driveway, and they quickly followed the cobblestone pathway to the porch. Tara knocked, and seconds later, a woman appeared in the door. She was dressed in plain clothing and letting off the scent of pine sol, as if she were in the midst of cleaning. But oddly, her face was caked in thick makeup. She looked them up and down, startled by their presence. "Can I help you?" she asked while carefully tugging at her lawn sleeves, even though it was a warm day. Tara narrowed her eyes. "Is Greg Davis around?" At Tara's question, a look of fear washed over her, and she reached for the short blonde bob, untucking her hair from behind the ear. It was like watching a curtain fall in someone's window, shielding a view they wouldn't want outsiders to see. But Tara could already see what she was trying to conceal: a fresh bruise, because no makeup or hair could hide the slight distortion on her face, because of a swollen cheek. "Well, who's asking?" she's finally questioned. "We are with the FBI," Tara said as she flashed her badge. "We just wanted to ask him a couple of questions. Are you his wife?" A look of concern swept over her. She nodded. "Is he in some kind of trouble?" she blurted before realizing her words could be too telling. She stroked her hair anxiously once more, making sure it had fallen onto its proper place. Suddenly Warren spoke. "No, ma'am, we just want to talk to him." The woman's eyes fell to the floor as she shook her head. "He's out hunting." "Do you know when he'll be back?" Tara asked. The woman shook her head again. "I don't know, maybe tomorrow. He stays overnight, usually in our cabin." Tara and Warren shared a quick glance before Tara spoke. "When did he leave?" Silence fell around them, and the woman sighed. She was growing nervous by this questioning. "Like we said, he's not in any trouble," Warren added again. But Tara knew this wasn't what was troubling her. There was something about that gave Tara a strange feeling, a familiarity. She had never met this woman before, yet she had seen this behavior, the awkward nervousness caused by a broken interior. It was like looking into the eyes of someone she knew very well, her mother. "We won't tell him we were here if you would like," Tara finally said. The woman remained quiet for a moment longer, ignoring the remark, but her face relaxed. She finally revealed, "He left yesterday morning." Tara placed the pieces carefully together in her head. He had been gone since yesterday, before evidence showed he met the victim, and yet he still hadn't come home. It all sounded premeditated, and now, after meeting his wife, it was evident that he seemed violent. Tara said, "Would you be able to give us an address for the cabin?" The woman nodded before leaving the room and coming back moments later with a pen and paper. She scribbled something on it and handed it to Tara. Tara thanked her, but before they said their goodbyes, Tara asked her one last question. "May I ask what happened to your cheek?" The woman's hand instinctually covered the area of her face. She stood there, dumbfounded, as redness seeped to the surface of her skin. But then a look of horror flashed before Tara as the woman realized why she would ask that. that her husband might actually be in trouble after all. And that could only mean that she would now be too by the hands of him. "I fell," she finally blurted before slamming the door in their faces. Later, Warren pulled onto a side road as they neared their destination, and Tara looked up from the map on her phone. She had just finished reading the last direction to Warren, and now they sat in silence as Tara felt awkwardness sweep through the car. She finally looked over to him. His eyes were unwearably focused in front of him, but she decided to speak to ease her anxiety. She hated silence. "You think it's him?" Warren glanced over at her and then back at the road. "Well, it's possible. The shop owner sure didn't know him as well as he thought." Tara knew he was referring to the marks on Greg David's wife. Warren's words were short, as they usually were, yet he didn't need to elaborate. His voice was laced with doubt, which only justified Tara's own inner feelings. It was something that was left unsettled within her gut, that this would be too easy and that the killer seemed just too smart. After all, he was smart enough to take 2 arrows, the belongings of the victim and the bodies of the first 2. Yet he left the compasses strategically. Everything about the crime scene was strategic. And at that thought, the same question crossed her mind. Would someone who thought so thoroughly about not leaving evidence fail to think of store cameras? She glanced toward Warren once more. "Part of it just doesn't add up to me," she said. "The cameras, why would he be so careful about not leaving evidence in the crime scenes, but yet let himself be seen?" She turned to Warren in her seat. "Doesn't that seem odd to you?" Warren nodded. "You think he's too smart?" "Don't you?" Warren pulled into a long driveway. "It's definitely something I've thought about, but we need to be prepared for the worst." His words lingered in the car as it bounced along the unpaved driveway. He was right. They needed to be mentally prepared for the worst, even if they had doubt in their mind. Tara stared in front of her as a weathered log cabin came into view. It was a decent size, surrounded by only the forest. But unlike the house they just came from, this cabin showed the marks of time, a discoloration in the wood, and a roof that needed new shingling. A car was not in the driveway, and Tara braced herself for the man they were about to meet. As Warren put the car in the park, Tara heard something. At first it was only a faint sound, but she listened intently, and when the car shuddered to a halt, she could feel and hear clearly. It was unmistakably a woman's scream, and it sent shiver on Tara's spine. She asked as she quickly let out her seatbelt, "Do you hear that?" Warren didn't even reply. He pushed his car door open and they both jumped out. Warren reaching around his waist for his gun before holding it out in front of him. "Mills, I want you to go around and guard the back," he whispered over the hood of the car. She nodded, watching him as he hurriedly raced toward the front door. Tara held out her gun, steadying it in her hand as it shook anxiously, her heart pounding against her chest. Each time the woman screamed, it sent a jolt through her body. It was a sudden panic taking over her. She knew, for she had been prone to the feeling many times before. But this time was different. She couldn't allow it to happen. She forced her body forward as she tried with all her might to steady her breathing. in and out, she told herself, as she took long control inhales. But each time she heard a scream, her heart would pick up speed until the panic seized her lungs as well, causing her to take short, quick breaths until she could barely breathe. She didn't even realize how far she had moved. Now, standing on the side of the cabin before her vision darkened, she placed her hand against the siding and steadied herself. "Mills, I told you to guard the back," Warren screamed. Tara felt a jolt through her body once again, but this time it freed her with a sudden rush of adrenaline as Warren whizzed past her. The screaming had stopped, and Tara quickly pulled herself together as she realized what had unfolded. She ran as fast as she could to the back of the cabin, and when she approached, she could see that a window was open and a short, stocky man was running deep into the woods with Warren on his tail. He had a good lead, a few feet in front of Warren, but Tara had to do something. She had caused this. She ran after them, weaving in and out of the trees, her eyes focused onto the two of them. Warren was faster and fitter. The fleeing man was growing winded, and Tara watched Warren close in, grabbing hold of his shirt. Relief flooded Tara's body, but only for a second, because as Warren fastened his grip, his foot hit a rock, sending him tumbling forward. He pulled the man's shirt along with him until it fell free from his grip, and the man stumbled back, losing his footing as well. His hands touched the ground for a moment until he steadied himself on his feet. He was about to pick up running again, but Tara had already caught up. She tackled him, sending his body flat onto the ground, then cuffed him. Warren stood up, covered in mud and leaves. He screamed, "What the hell happened to you?" Tara looked up at him, unsure of how she should really respond. She knew there was no way to hide the huge mistake she just made. "Get him in the car and call an ambulance." He added his words clouded with anger. He turned, running back through the woods to go check on the woman. Tara tried to pull herself together as she got to her feet and forced the man to walk in front of her. He stood up, defeated, his deep, sunken eyes focused in front of him as Tara forced him to the car. Moments later, the man was in the back of his vehicle, and Tara had called for an ambulance. Warren stood on the porch, speaking with the woman who was screaming moments earlier. He didn't even look up as Tara approached, his gaze fixated on the woman whose air-burned bangs were matted to her forehead with blood. Tara walked over and stood silently. She didn't dare intervene. "Can you tell me what happened?" Warren asked. "It's just my face," she said between sobs. "We were just fighting," and her crying intensified as she reached towards her forehead, trying to feel the extent of her injury. "He hit me and I hit the coffee table," she added. "We have an ambulance on their way. They will take a look in for you." The woman nodded. "How do you know him?" Warren started his questioning. The woman's eyes moved from Warren to the car where the man was peering through the window. "Don't worry about him. He can't hurt you right now." The woman sighed. "We've been dating for a few months," she replied as she looked from Warren to Tara. "I know he's married. He said they were done, that he was leaving her." She started to weep again at her words. She had answered a question that Warren hadn't even asked, but it weighed too heavily on her conscience. "Has he been violent to you before?" The woman looked up and had a look in... She looked toward the man in the corner of the eye and lowered her voice. "He had grabbed me a few times, but he only hit me once before this. He promised he wouldn't do it again. She touched the injured forehead once again. Sirens echoed off in the trees as the ambulance approached, but Warren had one more question. He had been holding the victim's pictures in his hand and he held them out to her. He said, "Have you ever seen any of those people?" She took them in her hand and peered at each one. No, I haven't," she said with certainty. The ambulance then pulled into the driveway and EMT stepped out and approached the porch. Warren thanked the woman and then briefly filled in EMT, who began attending to the woman's wound. He walked off to the side of the porch. Tara followed, bracing herself for a scolding. He looked at her for a moment with sheer disappointment in his eyes, silence lurking awkwardly between them. He was giving her a chance to speak first, but at the realization, Tara's palms began to sweat, her face reddening because she had no words to describe what just happened. She knew it was a panic attack. That much was obvious to even Warren. But the cause of it was so much deeper. It bubbled up from a layer of herself that she had always tried so hard to conceal. But she knew she couldn't tell him. She would look weak and damaged, which she already did. And without the strength to speak of it, she could only remain silent. Warren waited a moment longer, but then sighed too. "I'm going to take a look inside. You should probably come too." Tara knew she let him down once again, and it sat like a rock in her stomach. She followed behind him as they entered the cabin. They searched in silence as Tara tried to think of any way to explain her actions. She knew she messed up. It was a fear she always had, that her demons would somehow trickle into her present-day life, disabling her at her job. They had already trickled into her subconscious when she slept. But this was a new layer of it all. It affected her job. It was her worst fear coming to life. They searched in silence for a while longer. The cabin was spacious, with many rooms, and it looked just as Tara would expect a hunter's lair to look, with log-wooded walls, a deer head trophies mounted everywhere she turned. They searched in every corner of each room for weapons, compasses, anything that would link him in possible suspect. Warren finally said, "Oh, I found something." They hadn't been in the cabin long, and Tara followed Warren's voice to the garage. The room had a musty smell and was mostly empty except for a large black safe. But Warren stood on the other side of the room, 2 crossbows hung on the wall, and he was carefully taking a look at them. "We'll get them to the forensics, see if they could fire the arrow on a third victim," he finally said. Tara nodded before scanning the rest of the room. In the corner next to the wall of crossbows sat a canvas bag filled with arrows. She remembered what Reinhardt and the case file said, that the arrow found in the victim was a 10-point. She pulled each one out, checking to see if the brand name was written somewhere, but she couldn't find it anywhere. Warren said, "We'll get those to forensics too. We got to get in here though." "You think he'd keep a crossbow in here?" Tara asked, knowing it was much more probable that it would be used to store a gun. Warren shrugged. "It would be a better place to conceal a murder weapon than hanging on a wall," he replied before pressing a button to open the garage door. He was going to get a combination, and Tara followed behind him as he walked to the car and flung the back door open. "So what's the combination for safe?" Warren demanded. The man looked up at him, flustered, as he shifted awkwardly in his seat. I'm not sure I remember. Warren gritted his teeth. You are going to make this a lot worse for yourself if you don't tell me. The man sighed but remained silent, his eyes now falling to his feet. Warren began. Either way, we're going to get it open. We'll blow the door off, even if we have to. He finally blurted out, 6801. Warren slammed the door as he turned back to the garage. He was heated, but Tara knew it wasn't just the suspect that got him to the point. He was still angry with her, and it gave Tara this unsettling feeling. He walked over to the safe, tried the combination, and was quickly able to open the door. Tara moved closer, and just over his shoulder she could see a rifle. But Warren reached in and moved it aside, revealing arrows behind it. He pulled each one out, checking them for a brown name. Are they 10 points? Warren said, doesn't look like it, but I don't know why he was hesitant to give me the combination. We should head back to the station and get this to forensics. He began to collect the arrows in the safe, but then he spun round. Did you have anything you wanted to say to me before we head back? Tara stood frozen. Again, she didn't know what to say, and she could feel her face growing hot at his glare. Well, she started, but then she couldn't finish, and her voice fell silent. Warren shook his head, and Tara's heart sank. He turned back to the safe, collected everything, and then headed toward the car without speaking another word to her. Chapter 8. The home came into view, and Tara couldn't help but admire it. It was a lot